Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Welcome back to another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing, and we're going mobile this episode. But no, we're not going anywhere. We're going into mobile home parks. We've only had a few shows on them, and this one does it all. My guest is Jack Martin of 5210. We're going to talk about why he believes mobile home parks are America's most stable real estate. Let's go. This is episode 239 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Jack Martin. Jack is the co-founder of 5210. Now, this is a mobile home park episode, and I was telling Jack in the pre-call, I don't think we've done these, but Jack's background began with an Arizona-based real estate firm where he sourced off-market properties, acquired and sold over 2,000 single-family homes and over 900 apartment units, then got into the mobile home park game business in 2016 with this company. Since then, more than 1,500 mobile home park lots. Jack, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Jonathan. As we were talking earlier, this is just a conversation between two guys who nerd out on real estate, so this should be fun.
Yeah, exactly. And that's pretty much what I see the podcast as. So I'm glad that you said that. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the fun of it. But let's go way back. When was the first time that real estate became something you were interested in?
Jonathan, this will be familiar to the older portion of your audience, but yeah. I was in the military, 18 years old, listening to like 2 a.m. TV. And there was this guy named Carleton Sheets.
I was about to guess it.
Yep. And he was selling these cassette tapes, like a dozen cassette tapes that you ordered in the mail. That was the beginning of my curiosity. And then that pathway kind of led to development, buying land, small subdivisions, general contracting. And that led to a couple thousand single family rental properties, which led to apartments. When I decided that scaling on a single property made more sense. And then this mobile home park thing, the stereotype with mobile home parks is trailer trash.
Yeah, right. And I think that's why the non-investor looks at it like, how could that be good?
That's right. And I saw it the same way. I'm guilty of the same thing until I owned one. That's when I saw that wait a second, these are way different than any other rental real estate, just for the stability and the kind of recession-proof qualities that they have. And that's when I decided this is going to be the rest of my career. I'm going to do mobile home parks. And that was over a decade ago.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting corollary because, again, the perception of mobile home parks is that they're extremely transient. So they just assume that the business portion would feel the same, but it's actually the opposite.
Right. Yeah, and I think that the other thing that we've learned is there's just like there are in apartments or rental homes, neighborhood, quality of asset, there's a spectrum. So you could buy apartments in the worst neighborhoods in America that are D quality or call it F quality assets, or you could buy brand new Class A or well taken care of Class B apartments in a great neighborhood. So the same dynamic exists in the mobile home park world. There still is trailer trash all over the country. There still is.
Yeah.
But the kind of communities that we focus on are manufactured housing subdivisions. They're nice, paved streets, sidewalks. Some of them have garages. Some of them are gated, clubhouses and pools. I mean, they're nice. Places where you would be happy to see your parents retire to because it would be safe and comfortable and clean and all those good things.
Yeah, and again, that's another misconception that people think. Like I'm guilty of this as well. Like growing up, I thought trailers were actually trailers. First, I thought they were the things that you pull behind a car only. And then I thought they were things that were just so obvious to look at. Now, when you look at, quote, what is a mobile home, it just looks like a house. I mean, most people really honestly don't know unless you see that it's clearly a full development. Am I right on that? And did you think the same way?
Yeah, you are. Yeah. So if you go back and look at the history of trailer parks, because initially they were trailer parks.
Yeah.
So they were originally designed to be a place where people could pull a small trailer.
Right. So I was right.
Yeah, you were right.
I feel better about myself.
That's where they came from. And then somebody looked at that and said, wait a second, if we can build these, you can manufacture these homes in a controlled environment inside of a warehouse, ship them there on wheels, you can control all of the labor and material costs, then you could offer affordable housing and put them on these little lots, which were larger than an RV lot. That's where mobile home parks came from. Today, when they build a new one, they call them manufactured housing communities because they're the standards that mobile home parks or mobile homes used to be built were kind of like a little bit stronger than an RV. So instead of using 2x3s or 2x2s, they would use 2x3s. But everything was built to be lightweight. Drywall was thinner. The counter depth was narrower. Doors, everything was built to be lightweight because they were moving them.
Yeah.
Today, they build mobile homes with the same materials that you'd use in a single family home, 2x6 construction, the same insulation, the same quality infrastructure and appliances. And we have granite countertops and stainless steel appliances and drywall. And I mean, it looks like if you go into a new decent quality, mid-level quality or better manufactured home today, you do not know that you were in a mobile home. You just can't tell.
Yeah, and they're not meant to be mobile anymore. So even the words really don't describe what it is. And when you were talking, I was thinking of the tiny house craze now, and those are basically all mobile homes. I mean, the whole point is they drive them to the area and then pop them onto land, and they're probably honestly not as stable as what you're talking about, which is a manufactured home put on a slab or meant to be there that I guess could be moved, but really nobody has any intention of moving it because they're buying in a development.
That's right. Yeah, and then it doesn't make economic sense either. So, if you move into a community, you buy a new home, pay $100,000 for it, you pay your lot rent, and then 5 years later, something in your life changes and you have to move across the country. It wouldn't make any economic sense to move it. It would cost you tens of thousands of dollars to move it. Whereas you could just sell it, take your proceeds, and go buy another one. And that's right. What ends up happening. Jonathan, we've been doing this for a decade now, actually a little bit over a decade. We've got about 1,600 lots, 1,650, I think is today where we're at. We've only had maybe half a dozen homes move out of our parks.
Yeah.
In over a decade.
I feel like you're clearing up for the listeners and, of course, myself, all misconceptions about mobile home park investing, which is really important because it's such a great asset class and it's also a very popular syndication asset class. But I think people are scared off by what both of our initial prejudices were. Mm-hmm. So this is really enlightening to know that of 1,650, 12 have moved. So these, quote, mobile homes, they're not really mobile. They're just really smaller homes.
Yeah, and half of those moved because we decided to get rid of them. Somebody passed away and it was an ugly, older vintage home. And we thought, you know what, let's beautify the community. So let's tear that one out of here and let's put a new one in. So the economics just don't support moving these things. Once they're set, they're even though they're still technically mobile, the wheels are gone, the axles are gone, the tongue is gone, because they'll reuse those over and over to move other ones. Yeah. But you still could put all those things in place and move them. You could. So they're movable, but they don't move much at all.
Yeah. While you were talking, I remembered we have done one mobile home park episode, but it was much different. It was with Jason Velli, the quote trailer king. But he buys a lot of just single units. Did you ever buy any single mobile home units, or did you just start buying the entire parks?
Yeah, we just started buying the parks. So now we still because we buy these parks. We've never purchased a park where there wasn't at least one vacant space or one park-owned home, like a rental. Yeah. But in some cases, we've purchased the park that we purchased that had the greatest amount of vacancy was 121 vacant spaces.
Wow.
That same park had 100 park-owned rentals, of which half of those were vacant. So when we purchased these, there's some degree of that kind of upside, or you call it like repositioning that needs to be done. So we'll buy homes brand new from the dealer or from the manufacturer, have those installed, and then, make them so they're move-in ready, and then we'll sell those to new residents. I think, Jonathan, it deserves for your audience to kind of appreciate what separates. Why did I get excited about mobile home parks when I had done single-family condos, apartments? We did a little bit of commercial office, did a lot of land development, successful in every venture. Why did I fall in love with mobile home parks? It's because of these two things. First of all, 2008, if anybody can look back to the great financial crisis, it was a difficult time if you owned real estate.
Yes.
To say the least. If you weren't well positioned, it was a difficult time. What I discovered when I tripped over these things called mobile home parks is the only people who didn't experience difficulty were the guys and investors who owned mobile home parks. There's two reasons for that. So these are more, you could look at mobile home parks as, even though you can get a great yield, there's tremendous tax benefits, you can get some really nice cash flow. It's really a defensive strategy. You're protecting your principal. You're seeking to reduce the risk. So you'll find mobile home parks to be on the lower end of the risk spectrum. And there's two reasons for that. One is the tenants own the homes.
Yeah.
I own the land. So for your audience, the best way to simply describe a mobile home park is if you had a giant parking lot, instead of parking cars in every space, you park a home in every space.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's utilities connections in every space. And then as the park owner, we take care of the streets and the common area landscaping and the pool and the clubhouse and that kind of thing. But just by nature of the behavior, the psychology of the resident who moves into a mobile home park, they're moving in there as a permanent housing solution. That's their choice. Whereas if they're moving into any rental product of any kind, it's temporary. They're going to be there until something better shows up, or until something changes in their life. So the residents that we're attracting are people, they're homeowners. They want to be a homeowner. They want to live there for a long time, not just 12 months. They want to be there for 20 years. And they want to put their kids through school there, or they want to retire in that neighborhood with all their like-minded retirees. So that's such a unique dynamic that I didn't understand, and most people don't understand until they get exposed to it, that it is, you still have a renter who's paying rent for the parking space, but they own the home.
The infrastructure that you're responsible for is basically what's below ground instead of everything above ground they already own. So you have so much less CapEx possibilities, in terms of, somebody needs all the cabinets are from 1970. You don't care. You don't own those. That's a huge distinction. But also, as you're saying, when you look at it as an asset class at whole, it makes it a lot safer than I think people think.
Yeah, well, that's what creates the stability. So I look at this as like the affordability is what attracts new residents. They're really new quasi homeowners. So their all-in cost for their monthly payment on their home plus the lot rent is still less expensive than it would be for an apartment. So it's the most affordable housing solution, period. That's what attracts them. But what keeps them is the fact that they own their home.
Yeah, it makes sense. And of course, now I remember this is the third mobile home show. We did one with Franco Perez. So I'm glad, though, because it's contextual, but there were at least 100 episodes ago. But so the way that I'm thinking of it, the location is really what's going to sell the park, and then the amenities and upkeep, of course. But I think that general listeners don't understand that there is some prime real estate in America that is owned and run as mobile home parks. Am I correct?
You are. Yeah, so we own property where potentially the land is worth more than the park.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a cash machine. So there could be a long-term investment play where redevelopment 50 years down the road might make sense. But in the near term, a stabilized mobile home park is about as good of a cash generating investment as you could ever get. Then you start to pile on the tax benefits and the recession resistant qualities and all that stuff. Like, it gets even better. But a stabilized mobile home park is just really hard to beat.
Yeah, and just for the listeners, so say you have a mobile home park and you have 100 pads and there's 100 mobile homes on them. They own the homes. Those people can just sell their homes, and then the new buyer would just be moving into your basically paying HOA, for what's there,
That's
correct?
right. Yeah, and I think that shines a light, Jonathan, on the most expensive event that occurs for any investor who owns rental property is turnover.
Yeah.
You got a tenant that moves out. There's no longer income coming in. You have to go spend money to reposition the unit.
Right. No turnover. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah. You don't have that in this business. Well, you do, like once every year you have one.
Yeah.
So but just by nature of the fact that someone sells their home to the next resident, last month the previous owner paid the lot rent, and next month the new owner pays the lot rent. So you don't have that big gap. You don't have all the expense associated with missing income and then spending money to reposition, or even like giving out some kind of incentive to get somebody to rent the lot. So, having been an apartment guy and a single family guy, like I experienced the challenges of turnover. I mean, out of every 12 months, if you get 10 months worth of economic rent, that's pretty good. But in the manufactured housing space, you end up getting 12. So, and then typically what ends up happening is your income on every property always goes north, never goes south. The only time that you'd be exposed to something going south is if your infrastructure failed and you have a bunch of repairs.
And that would really come up from either a bad buy or bad due diligence, because if you do it correctly, you're planning because you understand the long-term game, and say you're buying in knowing like, okay, we're going to do the plumbing, but that's immediately going to put us at the forefront. And one thing that I was thinking that's so interesting when you were comparing to apartment buildings is like, you're not getting maintenance calls. What's the worst thing in an apartment? Fire and water. Mm-hmm. Great. Fire and water is the owner's responsibility inside, that just changes the dynamic of everything around it. You're making sure all of their hookups are correct and the amenities that you have there are available, but also they don't have to be the most, crazy amenities. They're basically more like campsite amenities. I'm sure at the nicer ones, they're getting better and better, but it's a different vibe for the people who want to live like this.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some of our parks are just affordable housing, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's a neat, clean, safe place to live. And then some of ours are fully gated 4-star communities with a clubhouse and a pool and, games and sport courts and garages and all that stuff. So the difference is the monthly payment for the space,
Right.
The affordable one's only $500 and that one's $1,000. So, more amenities mean you spent more money, but it also attracts a different kind of resident who wants to experience retirement there or something like that.
In your experience now of all these parks, again, there's these misconceptions out here that like mobile home parks, the people there would be trouble. I know that it's not true, but in your experience, have you found, how long do people usually stay at, let's just say, the nicer of the developments?
I've been in the business for about 12 years. Most of the tenants that were there when we purchased those parks are still there. So I don't know the answer to that.
Very interesting.
I don't have a long enough runway, but some of the parks that we've been in, when we talk to the residents, like mom and dad bought the unit and started paying lot rent 40 years ago. And then they raised their kids there. And then they moved to a retirement community and the kids still live there. 40 years, same family, same home, nothing has changed. So I think it's a lot longer than most people would recognize.
Yeah.
Certainly, when you look at the averages of rental product across the United States, it's probably somewhere between 12 and 18 months is the average, but it's probably 10 times that in the mobile home park business.
Yeah, and I guess it really depends on the setup of the development. Some are more set up, as you said, as we were saying, like those are really manufactured home, and some are built to be a little bit more transient, in and out, maybe depending on where they are or what's nearby.
Yeah. Well, quality of location obviously matters. I mean, when we start looking at markets, you could have a beautiful park that was well designed, but it's in a market where the population is declining. And even if it's full, let's call it like, some small town USA that was once a booming, let's call it suburb of an industry. And the industry has changed and it's moved to Texas or something now. even though it's full, the risk is, as seniors age and pass away, who's taking their spot?
Yeah.
It could be a beautiful community, but if there's not net migration or in-migration into that market, there's risk there. So there's a lot of things that go into evaluation of markets. That's one of the things that we look at. Median home values matter too. So even if you had a park that was completely full and there's no need for home sales, if the median homes value outside the park in the neighborhood around it is not large enough, you can't sell new homes in that park if you were to replace them. Or let's say you had a natural disaster, tornado comes through, wipes out half the park, and now you have 100 homes to sell. Well, if the delta between the cost of a home outside the park or inside the park is not great enough, you can't sell homes at scale. So these are all valuable lessons that we learned when we bought parks in little small markets and inexpensive markets. I think that all of that points to our thesis is that quality and expense of location will outperform cheap in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense across a lot of asset classes. One I was thinking of as you were saying that is just short-term rentals. They're obviously completely different products, but if you're good at operations and you have a really nice unit, you can beat all the competition. It doesn't really matter how many there are. One thing, though, that you were said that is interesting to me. So if the population decline, if people are having less children, is that going to affect the way you look at more deals as we go down? I mean, maybe not a population decline, but people are having less kids now. So that means there may be less interfamily transfers than there used to be. Is that something that you think might play a role somewhere down the line?
Potentially. But I think when I look at population decline, I'm actually more focused on the market itself.
Yeah.
So, if there's net population growth in a market, it may not be a family member that's assuming the home from their parents, but it might be, the new workforce. Depends on the type of park. I mean, there's family parks that are not age restricted. There's senior parks that are age restricted. Yeah. But if there just needs to be net population growth, whether it's from retirees or it's from workforce, those things need to be present. Otherwise, you can't sell homes and you can't fill up vacant spaces.
Yeah, so similar demographically, just looking at migration trends, to make sure that there's going to be more bodies in the area to be potential, on a percentage basis.
Yeah, and I think in addition to those things, there's crime. Crime, I think, is generally looked at as, in a macro sense in a market. But you and I both know that you can go to any market and find a crime-free area. And you can even go to a well-rated city and find terrible crime-ridden areas. So that's neighborhood specific or individual submarkets specific. But those things are important to look at. So you could have the most beautiful property. You place it in the worst neighborhood. You cannot attract tenants that do not live in that neighborhood.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, when you look at the long range goal of any real estate, and mobile home parks are the same, the goal is to have a tenant base that you really like. So where your park is located will dictate the type of tenants you can attract.
Yeah.
So then the quality of the asset and the expense of the monthly rent will determine, where in that tenant pool are you drawing from. If you want the cream of that tenant pool, well, then you better have the nicest asset. And you'll probably end up having the capacity for the highest rental rates.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that goes to the amenities too, as well, knowing your market, understanding who the avatar is of who's going in there. I mean, you don't need a pool and a slide and a 55 and over. It just doesn't, it's not the same thing. Maybe you need a pool.
That would be fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds good, but that it goes to show though, because like you're saying, there's a big difference between a 500 a month and 1,000 a month. And it's depending on the amenities. Of course, they all have electric plumbing and things like that. But if you overshoot your area and miss your avatar, you're going to be left with those 100 vacancies, and then they're going to have to sell to someone who has to repurpose and re-understand the market.
Yeah, I think there's a correlation between expense of market and monthly rent as well. So like we have a property in Carleton City, which is just outside of Tahoe. It doesn't have any amenities, or it's very few, but the rental rate there is much higher because it's in a $600,000 neighborhood.
Yeah.
than it would be in a $300,000 neighborhood in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah.
So location does make a big difference. I mean, if it's expensive to live in a market, well, that market still has working class people that service the market. They need affordable housing, and affordability is relative. I mean, go to the beach in California and get an affordable house versus, Kansas City. It's going to be wildly different.
Yeah, I mean, there's $2 million mobile home parks in Malibu. So, I mean, they exist. This is things that people need to understand. Hey, it's Jonathan. I hope you're enjoying this episode with Jack Martin. This guy knows a ton about mobile home parks. And if he's changed your perception of mobile home parks as he changed mine, and you're interested in getting in on the fun, you can start at 5210.com. Now that's 5210, the word.com. So first it's the numbers 52, then the word 10.com. You can go to a link that says learn the strategy and find out how they find what they find. And you can just listen to the rest of this episode to find out all of Jack's expertise about how they seek a stress-free investment for you that can also provide protection from a market crash. Let's get back to the show. How important is the manager of these? And when you're taking over, are you vetting the manager to see if they're a cog in the wheel that's going to be a plus or a minus? Because I feel like it's a very specific type of management because there's always somebody on site for these. How important is it?
Yeah, well, this is interesting because we discovered this the hard way. In the beginning, we were buying smaller parks. Our thought process was that they're...
Can you just say how many units is smaller?
Yeah, like just 30 to 50.
Okay, all right.
So our view was those are too big for the small investor.
Yeah.
Because they're like $2 million or above, something like that. Or maybe even $1 million or above. But they're too small for the institutional buyer. So that was, the goal when the beginning was, let's focus on that niche. Well, what we quickly discovered was traditional third-party property management philosophy does not work.
Yeah.
So it would work in an apartment kind of product, but in mobile home parks, there are additional things that need to be done that don't exist in a traditional rental product because you have home sales.
Yeah.
So you're buying new homes and you're setting them up and you're, a lot of vendors and contractors to get all that work done. And then you're marketing them for sale and you're solving for chattel financing products, which is a fancy name for mortgages on homes that move.
Yeah.
There's so many more pieces there. And then the lot rent is 25% of apartment rent. So the management company who's charging a percentage of gross rental receipts can only afford to do the basics: collect rent, hire and fire staff, pay your bills, and give you an accounting. That's it. That's all they can really do. And that's all that you can expect them to do for what you pay them. So because of that, vertical integration, if you're going to scale any business, it's required in the mobile home park space. You have to have your own internal solutions so that you could pull all the levers for property management, for hiring and firing staff, for maintenance, for construction, for everything, home sales, like all of that has to be vertically integrated. Yeah. I think that's what causes the greatest barrier to entry for somebody to go from zero to, a couple thousand lots. And if you're into a couple thousand lots, you're one of the top 100 owners in the United States. So it's a far cry from the publicly traded companies who have over 100,000 lots. But, it's a difficult business to get into. It takes a lot of grinding to get to where we're at. But what you discover along the way is small parks don't work. So a really good manager who lives on site, manages, the day-to-day, and a really good maintenance person who also lives on site and solves for all of the, maintenance issues associated with the property itself. A 30-space park can't afford that labor. Just can't afford it. So 100 spaces is where it starts to work. We learned the hard way doing it on small parks. So you can't have somebody living on site. You have to have somebody, then you have to create scale within a market so your footprint is large enough to where they can bounce around 5 different properties.
Right. Yeah.
And, that you can gain some economies of scale with that. But what we've discovered is really good quality manufactured housing community managers who already have experience in the space are going to be attracted to a park of size a salary that's affordable, a home that's on site, and then a culture within the company that supports them. So, culture in a company that's another whole podcast, Jonathan.
Yeah, of course. And again, it's an area or asset class where people would kind of diminish it, thinking like, because if you just think how we thought what trailer parks were, you think of management the same way, and it's not. These can be well-oiled machine, but you're making a lot of really good points on the numbers, which do correlate to apartment investing too, in terms of what the REITs and the hedge funds are buying. They're buying upper units when you can have on-site management, usually at about 100 also. But what I was also thinking is there's a lot of people who buy, and this goes back to your single family home buying. Someone will be like, oh, I want to get I just want to get a house in Memphis. So they get one house, and then they're like, confused why they can't get good property management. It's because nobody wants to manage just one house. It's it's a loss for them. So that's what you're saying that I think is important. There's a balance in terms of when you're going to get the best management. And you found that vertically integrating, which I think a lot of the best syndicators in multifamily are also vertically integrated. And it's still the property management isn't a gain. It's a gain because they're able to contain everything that's coming. So it's a gain on more of what they're getting everything else than actually generating business. Is it the same in terms of mobile home park management?
Yeah. So the fees that you get from property management are not a profit center.
Right.
But what it
saves you a lot.
It's a lever that you get to pull.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You can't control what a third-party property manager is doing. You can't guarantee that they're putting their energy focus on you to the degree that you would. Yeah. But when you build that internally and you have your own property management, 100% of their efforts are focused on the assets that you own, and there's no question. And then you can hire and fire around core values and performance. So being vertically integrated, it's surprisingly difficult to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, it takes a lot of skill sets. And like you said, you do have to provide something that's attractive for somebody to come in, which is going to be a good community to live in, and, people around who they're going to think they're going to have good relationships with. Yeah, it makes sense. And a competitive salary that makes sense all around. But as you said, if you have that, you're really ahead of everybody else in terms of the management, because there is a lot of terrible management in mobile home parks. So when you can grab somebody who's great and you have maintenance on site who's great, you're really, really in good shape in terms of who's going to move in there and their enjoyability. That's why, like you said, nobody's even moving, really.
Yeah. When we buy a new park, or let's call it a used park, but it's new to us.
Yeah.
Our goal is to keep the existing staff. If there's on-site maintenance and management, our goal is to keep them. And there are quite a few cases where that's possible. But sometimes the reason why the park traded in the first place is because the management is poor. But that's the problem that needs to be solved is the management. So I think that there's barriers to technology. I mean, we're pretty forward thinking when it comes to technology. The mobile home park arena has been lagging behind when it comes to all of the tools and resources available in the apartment game. But that's changing quickly, and we're kind of on the leading edge of that. So, if you acquire a park where the existing manager lives in unit 24 and she's 81 years old and she can't turn on a computer, that's probably going to be a challenge to implement all the technology that we do. Everything is digital. Nothing is paper. All the payments get converted to digital online payments.
Yeah. That's a huge upgrade, though, because that's definitely not the way that it was. It was almost like week-to-week payments in the past, cash, just like unaccountable numbers.
Yeah. Well, when you think about that, that's simple for the residents. It makes the management, like the hours spent collecting rent from the manager and going to the bank and doing all that kind of manual tasks, it takes all those off that plate. But then it also solves for the potential for theft or some kind of fraud with the on-site team. So everything is done directly to the bank account and the staff's not touching it. So, anything that you can do, especially when you're syndicating real estate, so that you can show your investors that, we've put all these measures into place so that we're protecting the income that's coming from the investment that you have an ownership interest in.
Yeah, I imagine sending out like a syndication, portfolio, an 18-pager, and then saying, "Well, we take these all in cash, so you're just gonna have to trust us on these
That's right.
numbers."
That's right.
Here's our bank accounts, which we could have just put the money in.
Yeah.
That's interesting, though. So now, when you go to present mobile home parks as syndication, there's obviously people who get it. They're probably easy and understand it, but there's probably a fair amount who come in with the same biases that we have. How do you explain to them, I mean, besides what we've already just talked about, hey, why does this make a good investment? And why is it different than the other investments out there? It probably goes back to the stability aspect that we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah, Jonathan, when I got into this business, I was selling the thesis.
Yeah.
I was literally cold calling to the tune of 10,000 phone calls a year, just to try to educate people on why you should invest in mobile home parks. But what we've discovered is once you create a great track record and you become a thought leader in the industry, you demonstrate that you are an expert at what you do, you tend to attract. It's like bees are chasing honey. So if you just plant flowers, they'll come to you instead of chasing them with a net. So what I've been surprised to learn, there's two different flavors of investors. If you look on the opposite end of the spectrum, the small retail investor, first-time investor, is seeking how much money he can make. He probably can write a $50,000 check, and he wants maximum yield. He wants his money back as fast as possible, and he wants to do it again, right? And he's not really interested in looking at the other pieces, which are the risk associated. Could I lose it all? I mean, this is the Bitcoin investor, right?
Yeah.
Not that there's anything against Bitcoin, but it's gambling, right? They're not interested in the tax ramifications, or like they don't consider all of that, right? The opposite end of the spectrum, and we get calls from seasoned investors who are specifically seeking mobile home park allocation because of the tax benefit. Their sole focus is, I need tax losses this year because I'm going to have gains and I need to offset those gains. So mobile home parks are one of the few real estate assets that can offer passive losses in the year that you invest to a greater degree than all of the real estate by a wide margin. So cost segregation, bonus depreciation, you could do that on every piece of commercial real estate. But what separates mobile home parks in the cost seg study is that most of the value of the property is in land improvements. So this is all the underground infrastructure and the roads and landscaping and fencing and lighting. And most of the park is not buildings.
Yeah,
you might only have a single building like a clubhouse. So because of that, the dollar for dollar potential in passive losses is there. Obviously the tax act is changing and it's sunsetting a little bit, and we'll see if it comes back. But to the degree that depreciation or bonus depreciation is available, mobile home parks, RV parks, and golf courses will get you the most because they have the most land improvements.
Yeah.
So you'll find that larger check writers are focused on how much tax loss can I get this year? And then how can we not how can we not sell the property? And so I don't do recapture of the bonus depreciation. Then I also am not exposed to the capital gains.
Yeah.
So what Nate and I at 5210 have created is an alignment of interest where, the challenge with the sponsor is, if we're never going to sell, how do I take the promote? How do I get paid for all of my hard work, right? So, but there's a way to create long-term, more legacy hold ownership where there is a return of capital through refinance events along the way. You're not exposed to those tax events. And eventually the sponsor and the LP's interests are perfectly aligned. And it becomes where I don't want to sell it either.
Yeah.
Because I don't want the tax event either. And that if I'm willing to stay in the game and protect my LPs from that tax event and get them the highest degree of tax losses up front, then eventually our relationship evens out. In the early years, they get maybe 80-20 or 70-30, but in the latter years, it might even out to 50-50. So I think that the longer any investor is in the game as an LP, the more their perspective will shift from how much can I make to how can we be strategic around tax. And the longer that any good sponsor, and we'll add the word patient sponsor,
yeah,
because those are rare, the longer you're in the game, the more you go from, hey, let's get in and out as fast as we can to let's solve for keeping it forever.
Yeah. So comparatively, it sounds like mobile home park syndications as an LP is a longer play compared to, I mean, of course, there's apartment conversions, things that are going to take a little bit longer to get paid. But your standard multifamily, I'm in them. I just expect, 5 years. Like, I expect to be out of there soon. But that's not the same expectation for an LP that they should have for mobile home parks?
It depends. So your kind of standard run-of-the-mill vanilla mobile home park could be 5 years.
Yeah.
But most of the kind of heavy value add parks, it just takes longer. I mean, you can completely renovate a 100-unit apartment complex in 9 months if you're good. You do half of it, renovate, let those other half the tenants move into one side, do the other half, and you're done, right? So you could reposition and be out of an apartment complex with permits and inspections and everything in 18 months from start to finish if you're really good.
Yeah.
To do that in a mobile home park where you're repositioning a large percentage of the property, what slows you down is home sales, because you're actually you're not selling the real estate, but you're selling the homes. And it requires, if you're really good, you could sell a home a home a week. On average, in a market where you have enough demand, you could sell a home a week if you're really good. But if you have 150 spaces to do, that's a 3-year project just to do that. And then before you can do that well, you still have to go through and reposition the park, and that takes 12 months. So your reposition probably takes, 3 to 5 years. Yeah. And then you want to stabilize the P&L and move rents to market so that you can maximize value. Our view is when you get to that point, you may as well refinance and still do a return of capital, and you can kind of rinse and repeat, but you haven't paid the taxes then. The reason why sponsors don't do that is because they want to take the promote. So they're impatient. And if you run this out over 12 to 15 years, you'll find out that as the sponsor, you would have been well ahead of the game had you stayed in. So it's the impatience that causes that to occur. And I can understand it in the early years of syndicating, because you need a paycheck. You need to get a pop so that you can start being the LP as well.
Yeah.
We've been in the game long enough to where, our full cycle assets have given us a pop, and we have a fund that's about to close. So that'll give us another one. So we don't really have the pressure. And then we're a little bit more like humble Midwestern boys. So we just, as your income grows, don't have your lifestyle change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's probably good advice to your investors out there.
Yeah. I mean, there's no reason. I mean, first of all, just randomly, I was thinking of it as said for lifestyle. Like, I mean, nobody really needs 10 bedrooms in a house. So I don't know what, there's a lot of luxury homes, but like you don't go in many of the rooms. So I don't really get the point myself. So that's part of it. But what I always talk about with people who run syndications, and you mentioned it before when you were talking about that first kind of startup investor, it's important that those ones you send away, because they're not a good fit, because they're the people who are going to be calling you, 6 months into a mobile home park syndication saying, I need to get my money out. You're like, we already talked about this. This isn't how it works. So is it important for you? Of course, now you have a track record. You're usually going to have people coming to you or referrals. You don't really have to chase people like in the beginning. But is it important to keep LPs out who are going to be a problem? Because the whole point is the limited part, silent.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the early years, if I can look back 20 years ago, I would take a $50,000 check. Even with all the drama, right?
Yeah. Well, you had to get started. It's just the way that it is.
Yeah, we just deal with it. So, when you have 20 investors, you have time, you have bandwidth to deal with drama. But as you grow, it's been pretty true that the larger the check, the less the drama.
Yeah.
So, we raised our minimums to 100 for our retail investment products. Our direct investments, the minimum is 300. So, and there's a little bit more like intelligence that goes with that decision, is because you don't want to mix $100,000 philosophy with $1 million philosophy inside of a direct investment.
Yeah.
They don't think the same. So when anything has to come to a vote, call it extending, they're not going to make the decisions the same. So larger check writers in the $1 million and up range, they would like to be co-invested alongside other investors who think like they do. What we've
That
discovered
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So we've discovered this through our relationships with investment advisors is the mental shift takes place at 300K. It's not $250,000. The $100,000 guy can be the $250,000 guy if he wants to go all in on an asset versus diversifying. But there's a psychological shift that occurs at 300 grand, and now you're one of the big boys.
Yeah.
Or big girls. So it's that's our direct investments where there's only a handful of investors who get exposure to it. And those are more legacy hold, tax strategy.
Right.
They're still going to get a 6 or 7 pref and a 15 or, mid-teens IRR. But the goal is really centered around tax.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to return capital so you can rinse and repeat, but we're not going to expose ourselves to the tax event.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a decent amount of cost seg shows, and it's just kind of an eye opener when you can take the asset, put it together with cost seg, and then also choose the years that you want to optimize it and adjust that way. And so what you said, I actually haven't heard said before, but it makes a lot of sense to me that the $1 million in investors, they're going to react the same way. Someone who puts in 50, which again, it's a good chunk, but it's not the same. You're not going in with the same idea because 50 just only can turn into so much. Where $1 million compound interest wise is just going to turn into more for an investment. So that's a really interesting point. And I think it can help a lot of people understand, like they want to know who they're investing in. If they're investing 50 in their first syndication, they want to know how many other people are in at the 50 to 100 range, because then you're going to be in a more similar group in terms of the decisions that you make if something does happen.
Yeah, well, there's also a good point that as sponsors mature, and their track record gets stable and they become a trusted entity, they get more interest from larger check writers.
Yeah.
So you start to get, single family offices and investment advisory firms that are reaching out in more of a programmatic relationship where they're wanting to write a check on every single offering that you have. So what ends up happening is from the administrative side, less investors is easier. There's less drama, there's less K1s, there's less reporting, there's less potential for a transfer of interest from your individual to your trust and all these other things that occur in the back office space. So raising your minimums is just a sign of maturity. So if you're out there seeking an investment and the check size is 25, well, you have to consider the maturity of the sponsor. Like there's probably a greater potential of risk there. And it's not just the fact that they can't command larger minimums. It's also the fact that they have to manage $25,000 minimums. They have to manage 4 investors for every 100. It's just opening yourself up to a tremendous amount of administrative, snowball potential. So these are some of the things that, and there's a handful of these kind of ancillary things, Jonathan, that investors that are focused entirely on yield. How much can I make and how soon can I get my money back? Are missing out on a lot of other things that are critical in the evaluation of an investment that's passive. Yeah. So, for example, does the sponsor have a succession plan? What happens if they die? And now me and all the other investors that are in this deal are stuck with a receiver who doesn't have a clue about this asset class for real estate. And we're not going to get the economic value out of this that we signed up for, right? So is there a well thought out succession plan that's designed in such a fashion that it will be seamless if the sponsor passes away, so that you're not in partnership with the sponsor's wife? Yeah. Or some receiver who doesn't have a clue what he's doing, that you have an actual expert that steps in and winds down the asset and gives you your money back with the proceeds that you intended to receive. So do you get your taxes on time? Are the K1s delivered? I mean, it's March 11th as we're speaking. Yeah. It's 4 days from when they're supposed to be in your inbox. Yeah. But certainly prior to the end of March, right? So do you have your business designed in such a fashion where that's the most important thing that you're doing from December 15th to March 15th on the finance department side? Yeah. Do you get reports on time? Are the reports better than a couple photos?
Yeah, that's
of
really
the
important
progress
to
on the
me
property.
personally, because as an LP, I read the monthlies and I read through the whole thing. It's because I feel like that's my role as an LP. So I don't want to ask a lot of questions, but I want to feel like, hey, I'm owning multifamily or I'm involved in mobile home parks. That's kind of the fun of it, of being an LP, is that I don't have to do anything, but I can read and feel like, hey, I'm contributing to this. This is what and the better the documents, I agree, the more comfortable I feel with the whole project as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. We chose to, because we experienced the administrative snowball. At about 50 investors, it started to get too much.
Yeah.
So we chose to use a third-party fund administrator, which is a benefit to me because I don't have to build that internal back office function.
Yeah.
But it's even a better benefit to the investor. So the LPs know that there's a neutral party referee in the middle. So the fund administrator reports exactly what happened in black and white. They have no vested
Right.
interest in coloring it any different, right?
Yeah.
So you can't skim or cheat or misuse funds, or all of that stuff has to be accounted for down to the penny when you have a fund administrator. So I think that's another kind of simple check for an LP if they're looking for an investment where, hey, I've never been in this space before. I don't really know the sponsor. Do they have a third party or neutral third party fund administrator? If they do, the likelihood of somebody taking your money and buying a yacht in the Bahamas it's zero.
And that does happen.
Yeah,
Look it up.
You just can't do it. So yeah, the track record is going to be important, but just the fact that somebody chose to use third party says they have nothing to hide.
Yeah,
so and then those neutral third parties also offer a little more functionality, because when a transfer of interest has to take place and when a investor portal needs to be switched or all those kind of things, like that's their function. They provide all of those things.
Yeah. That's great advice. Those are definitely things that I haven't heard much or at all, and very enlightening for people who are LPs in any type of syndication, but certainly interesting for helping them in that vetting stage on what to do and learning more and being able to ask the right question of sponsors. But Jack, if people want to get more information about you and your company at 5210, is the best place for them to go 5210.com?
That's right. Yeah. And it's the number 52 and then 10 is spelled out. So it's 52ten.com. Yeah. Go to the contact page, fill out a form. You'll get a invitation directly from me so that we can jump on the phone and have a chat.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. It's been a really eye-opening episode for me, one, to get on our third mobile home park episode, but also to talk syndications. You brought up some points and things that we really haven't heard before, so I really appreciate it. Your time in the business shows, and I'm sure my listeners were scribbling down those last notes that we were just getting at the end there. So thanks so much for your time. It's great getting to know you, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, Jonathan, you got a great name in the industry. Love your podcast, and I'm sure that life will work out such that we can do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it. All right. That was Jack Martin. He's the co-founder of 5210. And again, that's 5210.com, but it's 52, the letters, TEN.com. That's where you will find Jack and his team. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Thanks for sticking around to the end so you can get a preview of who's coming up on episode 240 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And it's a legend in the game. Next episode, it's Paul Moore, the founder of Wellings Capital, also the author of several books, including The Perfect Investment, Creating Enduring Wealth from the Historic Shift to Multifamily Housing, and Storing Up Profits, Capitalize on America's Obsession with Stuff by Investing in Self-Storage. He also co-hosted a wealth building podcast called How to Lose Money. This guy knows a ton, and we go all through it. See you next episode when you get enlightened by Paul Moore.